A summary of Mendel's principles. Mendel's principles form the basis of the modern science of genetics. These principles can be summarized as follows. The inheritance of biological characteristics is determined by individual units known as genes. Genes are passed from parents to their offspring. In cases in which two or more forms, alleles, of the gene for a single trait exist, some forms of the gene may be dominant and others may be recessive. In most sexually reproducing organisms, each adult has two copies of each gene, one from each parent. These genes are segregated from each other when the gametes are formed. The alleles for different genes usually segregate independently of one another. Beyond dominant and recessive alleles. Despite the importance of Mendel's work, there are important exceptions to most of his principles. For example, not all genes show simple patterns of dominant and recessive alleles. In most organisms, genetics is more complicated because the majority of genes have more than two alleles. In addition, many important traits are controlled by more than one gene. So here's a key concept. Some alleles are neither dominant nor recessive, and many traits are controlled by multiple alleles or multiple genes. Incomplete dominance. A cross between two 4 o'clock plants A cross between two 4 o'clock plants shows one of these complications. When the F1 generation produced by a cross between red flowers and white flowers, both with homogeneous dominant genes, when they consisted of pink-colored flowers, as shown in the Punnett square at the right, which allele is dominant in this case? So we went from red and white to pink. Neither is dominant. Cases in which one allele is not completely dominant over another are called incomplete dominance. In incomplete dominance, the heterozygous phenotype is somewhere between the two homozygous phenotypes. So RR and WW combine and make RW. This turns out to be somewhere between these two, right? It becomes pink. Red and white becomes pink. Codominance. A similar situation is codominance, in which both alleles contribute to the phenotype. For example, in certain varieties of chicken, the allele for black feathers is codominant with the allele for white feathers. Heterozygous chickens have a color described as erminet, speckled with black and white feathers. Unlike the blending of red and white colors in heterozygous 4 o'clocks, the flower, black and white colors appear separately. Many human genes show codominance too, including one for a protein that controls cholesterol levels in the blood. People with the heterozygous form of that gene produce two different forms of protein, each with a different effect on cholesterol levels. Okay, so with incomplete dominance, you get a blended color, pink, from red and white. In codominance, you get a little bit of both. You get white and black feathers. You do not get gray feathers. You get white and black. They are codominant. Multiple alleles. Many genes have more than two alleles, and therefore are said to have multiple alleles. This does not mean that an individual can have more than two alleles. It only means that more than two possible alleles exist in a population. One of the best known examples is coat color in rabbits. A rabbit's coat color is determined by a single gene that has at least 4 different alleles or possibilities for color, right? The 4 known alleles display a pattern of simple dominance that can produce 4 possible coat colors, as shown at the figure at the right. Many other genes have multiple alleles, including the human genes for blood type. Let's look at this. Okay, so here we have the 4 colors of rabbits: no color, a Himalayan color, a chinchilla, or a full color. And it's showing you the 4 different patterns. Okay. Polygenetic traits. Poly means many, genetic, many genes to make a trait. Many traits are produced by the interaction of several genes. Traits controlled by 2 or more genes are said to be polygenetic traits, which means having many genes. For example, at least 3 genes are involved in making the reddish-brown pigment in the eyes of fruit flies. Different combinations of alleles for these genes produce very different eye colors. Polygenetic traits often showed a wide range of phenotypes. For example, the wide range of skin color in humans comes about partly because there are more than 4 different genes that control this trait. So there are 4 different genes that control what color your skin is. That's why there can be such a wide variety of skin color. Applying Mendel's principles. Mendel's principles don't apply only to plants. At the beginning of the 1900s, the American geneticist Thomas Hunt Morgan decided to look for a model organism to advance the study of genetics. He wanted an animal that was small, easy to keep in the laboratory, and able to produce a large number of offspring in a short period of time. He decided to work on a tiny insect that kept showing up, uninvited, into his laboratory. The insect was the common fruit fly. I'm not going to say that. Morgan grew the flies in a small milk bottle, stoppered with cotton gauze. Drosophila was an ideal organism for genetics because it could produce plenty of offspring and did so quickly. A single pair of flies could produce as many as 100 offspring before Morgan and other biologists had tested every one of them. Before long, Morgan and other biologists had tested every one of Mendel's principles and learned that they applied not just to pea plants, but to other organisms as well. Mendel's principles also apply to humans. The basic principles of Mendelian genetics can be used to study the inheritance of human traits and to calculate the probability of certain traits appearing in the next generation. You will learn more about human genetics in chapter 14. Okay. Genetics and the environment. The characteristic of any organism, whether bacterium, fruit fly, or human being, are not determined solely by the genes it inherits. Rather, characteristics are determined by interaction between genes and the environment. For example, genes may affect a sunflower plant's height and the color of its flowers. However, these same characteristics are also influenced by climate, soil conditions, and the availability of water. So genetic effects, but also environmental effects. Genes provide a plan for the development, but how the plan unfolds also depends on the environment. Okay, so there's your assessment, and I hope it helps.